So this is a limiting reactant problem when you combine 10 grams of hydrogen gas, okay? 10 grams of hydrogen gas and 15 grams of oxygen gas. 15 grams of oxygen gas. Here is the equation. 2 moles of H2 plus 1 mole of O2 gives 2 moles of H2O. Now we need to find how many grams of water vapor made and what is the limiting reactant. So let's start working on that. I'm going to use next slide. I'm going to write this equation again. 2 moles of H2 plus O2 gives 2 H2O. We have given 10 grams of H2 and 15 grams of O2, and we need to find out how many grams of water produced. Alright, so we start with 10 grams of water, 10 grams of H2, and then we convert to moles of H2. So we know 1 mole of H2 and molar mass, which is 2.02 grams of H2. When you do that, grams of H2 cancel, you convert moles of H2. And when you see the mole ratio here, 2 to 2, so we use 2 mole H2O and 2 mole H2. So when you do that, your moles of H2 cancel, you get moles of H2O. Then you convert from moles of H2O to grams of H2O. You know that 1 mole H2O and molar mass of H2O, which is 18.0 grams of H2O. When you do that, moles of H2O cancels, you get grams of H2O. So you get 89.01 grams of H2O. So when you calculate, you get 89.1 grams of H2O out of 10 grams of H2. So this one, we got 89 from 10 grams of H2, we got 89.1 grams of H2O produced. Now let's start with 15 grams of O2. If we have 15 grams of O2, and when we convert into mole, we know that 1 mole O2 divided by 32 grams of O2, 32 molar mass of oxygen, and when you do that, grams of oxygen cancel and you convert moles of oxygen. By looking at this balance equation, you have 1 mole of oxygen used up and produce 2 moles of H2O moles. So when you plug that numbers, you get 2 moles of H2O produced when 1 moles of O2 used up. When you do that, moles of O2 cancel and you get moles of H2O. Then convert moles of H2O to grams of H2O. We know that molar mass of H2O is 18 grams and it is 1 mole of H2O. When you do that, moles of H2O cancels and you get grams of H2O. When you calculate, you get 16.9 grams of H2O. So that means these 10 grams of H2 produce 89 grams of H2O and 15 grams of O2 produce 16.9 grams of H2O. So by determining limiting reagent, we can say O2 is limiting one because that's the only one we can produce, right? Because O2 is the limiting reagent. So we can say O2 is limiting.
Is O2 limiting because it's closer to the 15 grams of the, because it's small? Or
It's
is it
a
just
small
because it's
amount.
smaller? Okay.
And that's why it's a small amount that's going to be used up and produce whatever the amount of H2O. Now, here is the question, how much of H2O produce? Since O2 is the limiting one, so we can produce only 16.9 grams of H2O. Rest of the others will be excess, right? Excess reagent. So in that case, H2 is excess reagent and O2 is limiting one. Okay? Question,